We are live. Welcome back to Season 4, Episode 1 of the Lunchtime Livestream. Today, I'm going to be talking to Francis Rifkin and Graham Lucas, and it's going to be mainly around the Performance for All document that Equity is starting to share after the pandemic as we come out to try and disrupt the funding sector a little bit is the intention, but in a nice kind way, to challenge and to encourage us to examine how we funded the entertainment industry and live performance, particularly before, with all the things that happened before, that we were really trying to put together how we could keep pace and how things might change. And now that we've had a year of pandemic and lockdown, there's been a lot of thinking, there's been a lot of potential future campaigns put together. And so I'm going to be talking to Fran initially, and I'm going to bring Graham in. So I am going to introduce Fran first of all, hello Fran. Fran and I have been doing live performance talking about equity for probably 12 years. 12 or 13 years. So we were initially, I was brought on to the Small Scale Theatre Committee, co-opted from the Stage Managers Committee. And that's how I met Fran. Fran was the chair of the then Small Scale Theatre Committee. So Fran, just tell me and the Lunchtime Livestream audience, what was the Small Scale Theatre Committee and how did you get involved with that? How does that relate to your industry journey and your equity journey?
Well, I could either give you the entertaining version or the non-entertaining version. But I will tell you that when I started my theatre career as an assistant stage manager, wanting to be a director, I worked first at the Royal Court Theatre in the late 60s and then in the early 70s at the Royal Shakespeare. I was fired from both companies. The first one for being insufficiently subordinate. They got me into a room and said, "You are insufficiently subordinate." And they were all supposed to be lefties, but I was insufficiently subordinate as an assistant stage manager. And then in the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, I learnt a lot from the actors. I watched some of the directors working. They were quite good, but the actors were wonderful, like Judi Dench and co. And then I rather unfortunately tried to start a strike in Australia and got fired at the end of the tour. And I retreated. Actually, I was relieved because we went into, became Recreation Ground Theatre Company. We went to the Lamb and Flag pub in Covent Garden and started doing lunchtime theatre in 1971, was it? And that was where we became aware of the absence of alternative theatre structures within the union, within the theatre. That theatre was very much seen as a hegemonically pointed top. And so there were lots of us, lots of really well-known now companies going into the independent field, doing political theatre, doing children's theatre, and with no money. And so from inside Equity, as an equity member, I started arguing with the ultra right-wing council at the time. And we got independent theatre arts groupings together. And if you look at the Equity Small Scale Theatre Committee history, you will see that we started off having a small unofficial grouping of independent theatre groups, alternative theatre groups, as we call them then, which eventually became the Independent Theatre Arts Committee. I can't remember without looking very fast what date, but it's all, the document's available to them, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's a link on the screen at the moment. So
link on the screen. And so that progressed its way into a committee in Equity, progressed its way by about 1978 into negotiations for a contract and an ongoing sort of struggle with Christine Payne and Paul Fleming, who came as an organizer in the early 80s, supporting it and helping us to formulate the field.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Paul, there's a contraction of time, isn't there? Because I think Paul came onto the committee as, I think we were his very first
group, I think.
Who, when he came to us, we'd gone to Edinburgh before Paul had been around, so it must have been about 2010, 2011. Paul came into our cabal to be able to help us within the union. But a lot of the stuff that you were doing, I mean, from the 70s through to the 80s, the Arts Council as we know it. So I was born in, I will put my age out there, I was born in 1972. So a lot of the generation of theatre makers at the moment that are in their 30s and 40s, a lot of the history and a lot of the things that you established, the group of people that were your peers in the 70s and 80s, really laid the ground for what was destroyed in the 90s and thousands, and we're now trying to get back to.
Well, what happened was that every time we put it together, there was an attack on it through cuts in funding. That the Arts Council moved its funding structure from a structure that provides the arts to a structure around perfection and professional perfection, really, excellence, and then portfolio. So the portfolio model of funding was aimed, in our view, not just mine, to exclude a lot of work and to offer criteria that were not necessarily relevant to it. Because we were arguing for criteria in the early 70s that were between audiences and providers, practitioners. I remember going into the Arts Council about 1971 or 2 and saying to the then officer, I want to do anti-fascist theatre in working class communities. Is that all right? And she said, yes. And we got funding. We did anti-fascist theatre until about 1977. And I don't believe that asking for that sort of thing now would have the same reception, because there was a providing structure rather than a crowned structure. So I think what Karen's saying is right. There's been a continual battle over trying to provide and trying to have what they call excellence.
And how many, in those earlier days, how many companies were competing for the funding?
Well, we started getting the funding around about 74, 75, wasn't it?
Okay.
And the companies all got together and campaigned for it. We set up the Alternative Theatre Committee. You know, I'd have to look it up and see. It is on record.
Yeah, I mean the small scale history document. I mean, I know all the time that I've been working on the small scale theatre stuff. The independent then became the Independent Theatre Arts Committee, and with your UtopiaArts work and the forum theatre and the community work that you try and do. I've always been trying to piece together your story because it's so rich and it's so connected with the history of independent theatre. As I say, I've got the document in front of me. So the Equity Small Scale Theatre Committee was a specialist committee that oversaw on the union's behalf the terms and conditions of work in the small scale theatre sector. And it was really key that I remember working with the committee and that we were the only committee that actually had that remit.
Yes, we were.
Those working parties that negotiate the Theatre UK and the sub-rep contracts. It's made up of representatives from lots of different committees and you nominate someone. But the ITC contract was very much a group of that committee that essentially at one point, it kind of felt like we were the ITC negotiating committee. And I remember fighting to say, okay, we need to do other things, which is when the Mapping the Sector project was attempted. So I mean, this is an old document that we've got and it really needs to be updated, but I've always kept it to hand that, you know, the history of the small scale theatre, there was a heading of its roots. The small scale theatre has been around for a long time. It can be traced back to the workers' theatre movement in the 1920s and Unity travelling groups in the 1930s. The London-based Unity Theatre Company were notable for pioneering new forms such as company-devised documentary pieces. And in the mid-30s in Manchester, Joan Littlewood's mentioned, Ewan McCall. It goes all the way through to bringing in the Royal Stratford East stuff, which has really fundamentally driven fun palaces. Stella Duffy's work with fun palaces all came from the Joan Littlewood Stratford East movements. And then sort of consciousness. It was the thing when I was writing this document with you and everyone was contributing. I sort of remember sort of putting together the paragraphs. In the post-war period, these, among others, were precursors to the explosion of the work that took place in the second half of the 1960s. It was fueled by both the spirit of political adventure, which grew out of the optimism of the opposition of the Vietnam War, and by feeling the mainstream theatre was insufficiently innovative and inclusive. By 1972, there was an increased number of companies in operation, many, though not all of them, young, many either underfunded or not funded at all. That is so resonant of just today and the sort of the current affairs that we move through.
But the atmosphere was different. As I said to you, I went to the Arts Council, applied for a grant. There was a panel of practitioners that you went to, and Sue Timothy, who may even be with us now. And so the notion that there should be an extensive alternative theatre field was not rejected. It may have been underfunded, but we did, in fact, we asked for £1 million for the Fringe in the early 70s, and we campaigned for it. And we got £500,000, which in those days was a relatively large sum of money. And so having got that, we then spread all over the country. It was fascinating to watch. Of course, we were all arguing and picketing the Arts Council. We picketed the Arts Council. I remember going into the Arts Council and talking to the head of the Arts Council. We were negotiating with them for wages. Did anybody ever do that again? Don't know. And I remember saying, they said, what is your basic demand? And I said, £47.50 a week. And the head of the Arts Council said, oh, that's far too much. And we glared at each other.
This, the document that's only a 2-page A4 document, some great sort of paragraphs that you guys put together. The birth of the Fringe is in there too. 1973, the London Association of Community Theatre Groups was set up in London, based community for political theatre companies. Soon after, it went national and became the Association of Community Theatre Groups. It contained many equity members who felt strongly that the new field of work should be consolidated both through an increase in the funding base and equally through recognition by equity, the establishment of new contracts and protections of practitioners in arduous working conditions. The name the practitioners chose for the whole field of work, funded or not, was Fringe Theatre, or the Fringe. So,
well, that came from Edinburgh, of course, because the Edinburgh Fringe was already in existence. And so we picked that up as a sort of defiance, really.
Yeah.
Eventually, when we negotiated the contracts in 78, wasn't it? 78.
It's a long years ago. I mean, the next part of here is there's a section on the ITC that in 1974, another large grouping of fringe practitioners wished to set a wider umbrella left-wing constitution would permit. They formed the ITC,
Independent Theatre Council.
Both organisations were very active.
Could I say something? That the reason we're talking about this now is not because it's in the past, but because Equity's funding document, Performance for All, which is a current document, publicised finally in 2019, has come out of that struggle. And I always get nervous that people think, oh, she's an old-fashioned bore going back to the past. But actually, Performance for All came out of that.
And this is, I mean, it's been around for a while. We've talked about this document. I carry around versions of this document. I've been trying to unpick it and understand it and absorb it. It's a tiny document, but it's dense and it's rich. And partly today, having looked through it, we can't talk about the overview, and there's been overviews of this document. What I was hoping to do today is, let me put the link up for it. There we go. So the Performance for All campaign page of Equity is available. Go take a look at it, download this document, have a read of it, and read it in context to your experience of employment and relationship to the industry. Today, we're going to be looking at just one policy section in here. It's policy number 7. And if there are people there who happen to have booklets to hand, it's page 20.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
It is a very complex document. I took it to Devoted and Disgruntled very long ago. And we get, I love Devoted and Disgruntled. It's got all the new practitioners and some of us older ones in it who want change. And I started talking about the document and nobody had read it. So what I did was I'm not surprised, because this is the point of what we're talking about, really.
It is. And we're starting to break it down. Yeah.
I read the introduction to the document to them. It's worth looking at that and then looking at the bits. But it was perfectly clear from that we need to translate it into different fields of work, because the specific application of the document will vary.
Yeah, but I think finding yourself in this document. I've gone to the point now where on my iPad I've uploaded it as a PDF and I've been scribbling over it to sort of identify which bits either don't make sense to me, and then you start highlighting things that you think, oh, I want to come back and look at that. And then there's blocks of it that you think, this is really vital to the entire industry. So I think it's important for the entire document to exist. And the great thing about it, it starts with a summary. It then lists the campaign points, and those campaign points are increasing funding for transforming of the performing arts, fighting for a living wage, full representation for all, make funding balanced and fair, democratise funding criteria for organisations, which is what we're going to look at, establish creative leadership and accountability, expand the entertainment, variety and circus fields, extend public TV and film, and increase arts, education and training. And there is a section 10, so it's then got 10 sections.
Could I add?
And each of those 10 sections have two parts. One part is sort of the facts and figures and the working party that have put this together, who are...
I'll tell you. Do you want me to say?
Well, I'll just read them out here. So the working party were Malcolm Sinclair, Maureen Beattie, Ian Barrett, Bryn Evans, Julia Carson-Sims, Christine Payne, sort of representatives from the officers. The campaign group was Francis Rifkin, John Gillett, Peter Barnes. From the Screen and New Media Committee, Linda Rourke. From the Stage Committee, Magdalene Worrell. The VCEC had a representative, Yvonne Joseph. And then from the branches, there was James Ivans from North and East London, Gerard Cook from Bristol and West General, David Cockayne from Manchester Region and General Branch. And then the officials that supported the working party were Stephen Spence, Louise McMullen and Chloe Alexander. And together they have... I mean, you must have gone through so many documents. They are referenced, but that first bit of each policy area kind of gives the facts and figures, and there's going through looking more at them, and there's also updating them. But then point 2 in each section is policies for the future. And what I'm wanting to do with a 10-minute section, 10, 15-minute section, which is going to come next, is just look at 7.7, democratising funding. Point 1 is some of the key facts, and there's some that I've highlighted that I want to, put out there. And then also 7.2, which is the policies that, taking those facts, what equity would like to see happen to the industry.
I think there's one more thing you need to say here, and that's what the percentage of national income we proposed should be applied to the arts, because it's a huge increase. And I can't remember what the percentage is. Can you see it there? It is in there. 0 point something. We need to find it.
Not particularly the bit. So what I will do...
You need to let people know that this needs to be funded.
Yes.
And that funding proposal is revolutionary, because it does not accept the basis on which funding amounts have been set up in the past. And that caused some concern at the Arts Council, of course.
And I'm keen, the reason I've picked, the reason why I've picked Section 7 is because an independent stage manager and creative theatre maker and independent producer this is the section, as I went through it, that was actually mentioning independence, and it was mentioning the things on local level and regional level and national level outside of the capital that I wanted to talk about. I've been talking to people about this document and saying, if you could pick 20 things, or if you could select 3 things, trying to tease out what we can start to have proper discussions around, so that we can then pull resources to very specific areas. And this section for me, so let's see what sort of facts are in here. Also, in the background, we've got Graham Lucas listening in, and Graham's going to join us after we've had our bit of discussion to kind of give a few insights, because as part of UtopiaArts, he's an incredibly valuable member of the team, because he kind of says those things that are succinct, and we go, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you. So
I go on and on. Yes. All right.
So 7.1, democratizing funding and decision making. It's page 20 on the booklet if you want to follow along. It starts with a quote, and it is, "It will not be possible to do as much as we want to do as quickly as we want to do it, but that's no excuse for not doing as much as we can and more than has hitherto been attempted." And that's a quote from 1965. It kind of sounds like something that was said at the Hobbit party when he announced his, the people here that I want to see and those that I don't. But I think it's a really poignant quote. And then the points that it goes on to. So the first one was 40% of audiences are outside London, says the Warren Commission. We have seen arts funding favour London over the regions by a ratio of 15-1. The arts in London receives 65.8 per head of population, as opposed to £4.91 for arts in regions outside. Since the start of the lottery, as additional funding, 82% of its funding has gone to London, 4 times the amount received by the rest of England. So there's a lot of facts in here that kind of split the capital from the regions and nations. But the Arts Council has pressed, the Arts Council have pressed the DCMS Parliamentary Committee to commit to fairer distribution of taxpayers and lottery money. It's barked on the Creative People and Places scheme. And some of the things that are mentioned in this document that when it was first conceived in 2019 have come to pass. So I'm sort of looking to go back to the People and Places scheme, which is currently still running, and what are the facts that have come out of that? You know, has anything changed? Arts Council is now committed to offer 56% of its budget, 75% of lottery money to regions outside of London. That was a figure from 2017, 2018, although these figures have been challenged. So all of these sections in talking about the facts in this section, which is about democratizing funding and decision making, it starts to mention point 6 of the data bits, another disparity in its funding of large and small scale organisations. 84 organisations receive 1.1 million or more per annum, and they get 81% of the national budget. And some of those stats you go, oh, they look good, but what do they mean? So I think there's a case for some infographics to be produced around this document, but that sort of the figures are all here. And before, as I say, I'll hand the mic over to you in a second, Fran. My last sort of highlighted bit for here is funding of smaller organisations receiving under 100,000 per annum has halved since 2007-2008, and most are on short-term programme grants. And I think that kind of summed up for me what my experience of the Arts Council is in terms of the input or the output that I get in terms of funding, and the people who are around me are getting in terms of funding. It's very short term, although it is money that comes to us, there has to be a better way. And I think that's what this document is trying to evaluate. So in terms of the facts and data, Fran, before we go on to what the policies are that you all came up with, what sort of stuff going on in the independent sector in terms of that section of this document resonates with you?
The fact that the notion of provision has gone.
Okay.
And so, and the notion, if ever there was a notion of employment in theatre and the arts, which I think the notion of employment, the notion of being able to rely in any sense on work, I don't think has ever been there. What we fought for in the early 70s was to get enough money to pay people equity minima and to negotiate proper contracts. That worked for a while. As far as I can remember and tell, the number of people employed in the independent field wasn't bad at all. Then it all got dragged back again at the end of the 70s. And so the recurring struggle, A, to fund theatres that people get proper livings, because in fact, payments in theatre are not. The basic minima, their equity struggles and fights for them, are not high enough. And then enough work to justify training thousands and thousands of artists in drama schools and in other places, who then spend most of their lives not working, and that keeps wages low. It also exacerbates racism and sexism in the arts, because the issue of whether enough people of Black and minority ethnic can get work is partly related to the fact that there aren't enough jobs for anybody. And so the competition, I think, becomes extremely unpleasant and in the end racist through employers. And it's complicated. I can't say final things about it.
It comes on to that. One of the points here, we are not seeking to dictate what and how work is produced artistically, but to increase the opportunities for wide-ranging, accessible, inventive and unpredictable work of quality.
Yes.
You know, it's that, you know, we want there to be great art and culture, and we want to be given the funds to produce that and make that.
But also it's a question of who decides what's great. When we were doing the anti-fascist theatre and went round the country chased by the National Front, which was quite exciting in the end, you got used to it. Occasional performances attacked. The people for whom we were doing this work loved it. And they helped us improve it by discussing it and coming into it and explaining. We eventually did anti-fascist work in schools for children. Now, that came out of the context within which we were working. And I would say the same thing happened when I was working for Banner Theatre in the early 80s. And so the issue is, who decides what's good? Who decides what works? Is it a central organisation which funds high art? Or is it groupings, councils, local? There were regional arts councils in the early 70s. And those had their faults, but at least they were regional. So that when I said to Sue, we want to do anti-fascist theatre, she said yes. It seems almost.
And that's the thing, that there's a whole history behind funding and excellence and how you choose that and the competition and the policies then that equity are trying to engender and to be talked about. I mean, the very first line of the policies for the future section under this democratizing funding and decision making, autonomous, equitable and accountable regional national funding and creative leadership. We want to see an expanded, fairly balanced, socially responsive, democratically cultural provision. So we would all want those. And I think these nuggets are what we need to be having the discussions about. We need to be asking networking groups that are meeting regionally and nationally how these particular points either resonate with them or whether there are examples of it happening or how they can make that happen. The consultation should occur with local organisations, professional and community-based, to determine their potential needs before grants, management, marketing structure, etc. are in place. So the structuring of independence, I think with the bigger organizations, if it's the West End or the big industrial juggernaut that is the entertainment industry, happens at this managerial level, that the performers, and when you're working in the industry, you are just a worker and you can have autonomy within that and your contracts protect you. But when you are an independent, the ITC contract becomes a compact for you and your employer that keeps you safe. And often you can be stepping on both sides of that. You might be using an equity ITC contract as a creative, but then you might do a project in a few months' time where you're bringing on creatives to collaborate with you, and you want to have a foundation of contract. And often the ITC is the foundation of how we work and collaborate together. It's there's quite a lot of things to unpack. Set minimum levels for the proportion of grants spent on in-house productions and other creative activities. The maximum levels for what is spent on admin and marketing. So also these policies talk about how money is split up, of how much you spend on your people as opposed to how much you spend on your marketing, and having some kind of parity between those. The workforce, like funding, needs to be rebalanced towards creative practitioners. And I think that is a real core part of this entire arts policy. A workforce needs to be rebalanced towards creative practitioners. At the moment, it's not about us, it's about the big buildings often.
Could I add something?
Absolutely.
I've pasted it into the chat, is that we're not alone with our document. The South East Regional TUC Committee, the CLIC Committee, which I chair, has also done a document on funding, which I put an introduction to into the chat. And so we've actually been working with South East Regional TUC for a long time now.
And I think I will get those links from you and I will put them with the show notes of this so we can start building that up.
I think we should send the links. I've found that link very hard to find, the CERTUP one, but yes.
Anyway, so in terms of the policies in section 7, Fran, is there anything in there that you were key in contributing to, or that you want to highlight at this stage about independence?
Well, actually, I do think it's probably important to say, because the assumptions are strange on this. Mm-hmm. We, in point 8, we are not suggesting that we get rid of the National Theatre or the London-based organisations. We are proposing that money be raised all over the country to match that funding. So the distribution policy, and that is a real national theatre, if you like, that we're talking about, one that is owned by and seen by and played with by the population.
And that happens to be one of the points I particularly marked for today. Consultation should occur with local arts organisations, professional and community-based, to determine their potential needs for grants, management, marketing structures, and that they are all in place. Lack of consultation leads to inadequate distribution of arts provision.
Absolutely. I could hardly have put it better myself.
And you guys actually read it and put it down here. So as I say, this is I hope I'm going to actually bring Graham onto screen now so we can kind of start winding it up and see if we've got any nuggets of wisdom that comes from Graham and what we've been talking about. So Graham, please join us on screen. Hello.
Hi.
You've been sitting patiently in the green room.
It's been a very good discussion.
Yeah? Is there sort of anything stand out for you?
I don't know whether I can make some general points about arts funding, which go beyond document, but that it's always been thought, creative people, artists, performers, and so on, have always been thought of as individuals who do their own thing. And because of that, no one has seen any particular reason to give them money to do that. It's sort of thought either that they're frivolous or else they're eccentric in some way, and so they're not controllable. So giving money to them as individuals has always been an issue for bodies, institutions, governments, and so on, because they can't be sure what they're going to do with the money. And you get caught between two stools. If you're an individual creative, you may be being frivolous, you can go and do your own thing and no one cares. However, if you happen to come up with something which makes money, then everybody wants you. But the gap is between the two, and no one wants to fund the individuals until they produce something. But of course, many people get no chance to produce anything if they haven't got some money to live on.
Yeah. And
now, if you go back to the 1970s, there were plenty of jobs available. So somebody who wanted to pursue a career in the arts could go and get a job for 2 or 3 months and then give it up and spend the next few months doing what they want to do. It's much, much harder now to live like that. You can't just go and get a job quickly, and then you can't always afford to discard it after a month or two. So you get caught between the Labour Party that regards arts as something rather frivolous in comparison to the needs of society, and the Tories, who basically don't see why they should fund anybody for free, who think you should work for a living, and therefore if you aren't successful as an artist making lots of money, there's no reason for them to give you money. So this has been the overall problem.
Yeah,
but it's also the elite. It's the hegemonic position of the elite, which they don't think outside. The arts are up there. That's what they think, I think. Sorry, Graham, go on.
No, that's all right. I was just going to add, this is a really good case for the citizen's wage. It wouldn't be a lot, but for people in the arts and performing arts and so on, it would be enough to get by on while they develop their skills. And if Boris Johnson wants to build back better, and if he also believes what he says, which is that one of the main industries in this country is the creative arts and creative products, video games, all that, then they should be looking at ways to fund people to be innovative without expecting them to produce anything brilliant in a few months or even a few years.
Yeah, that's one of the points. Opportunities must be offered for new organisations and people starting out in the industry. In other words, a more democratic and flexible process for determining and funding decisions.
But always, we said all the way through that the relationship between the decisions and the public, the receivers, the audiences, the participants, the new artists is absolutely central to all that. It is not something that is left out of the criteria. So, yeah.
And so that's kind of just that, and that's just one section of this document. I mean, it doesn't look big, but that's just one section of the document. I mean, one bit that we touched on a little bit, we've mentioned excellence. There's a point in here, replace the general criterion of excellence with a wide range of specific criteria that could be used to analyse any performance work and determine funding. Arts Council's own unfortunately titled Quality Metrics and Consumer Insight Toolkit survey offers a possible way forward, although they have been limited to helping organisations understand their audiences better and are in need of substantial renaming and rethinking. And just what I would like to see happen is people from the Arts Council, or people who are moving in those producer circles that don't straddle this line that we do of being a maker and a producer and having to wear different hats, to kind of take these paragraphs and thinking about them, either discussing that it's wrong or saying, yes, you've got a point, how can we all work together to forward this? And I think it's a great foundation for all sorts of organisations to just pick the sections that need to be related to their own strategy and question their own strategies and visions and business models to see if they are matching up to the best kind of funding structure that we can have in the 21st century.
But what's got to underlie this is challenging the notion that we should expect to be unemployed forever. So the next generations of theatre workers expect to be unemployed. I've had arguments. I remember at one of the Devoted Disgruntled, I sat down with a group and I talked to them about the possibility of an alternative funding structure. And they all talked about the courage and invention which they used to try to find work. And after about an hour, we agreed that there were two courses of action. One is the one you've got to carry on with, which is looking for work. You can't just stop, you do. But the other is to think of a new structure and how we might get there. And as Karen says, how it applies to the fields of work you're in, because this document is useful, but it needs to be applied.
Yeah.
And so you need to think about what it might mean if the particular areas of work were to have that used in them.
So I would like to hear from people which section they would like to tackle in this. Is there an element of this document that you would like to discuss? Let me know, because I would really like anybody who has watched this on demand, or if you're watching live, this has gone out to YouTube and Facebook page and to Twitter or to Periscope, which will soon sadly be no more. But please do subscribe, follow, or like on whichever platform you are, and do comment if anything has resonated. I can get back to you. There will be show notes and links in a link that I will promote on different things. If you do want to email me about anything in the show, or you'd like to come on and be a guest, doesn't have to be anything equity related. I've been talking about social technologies, about emerging producing. I often talk a lot about dyslexia. I will often talk about technologies that are on the horizon. I'll often nostalgize, if that's a word, about where my technology journeys come, and there's a bit of sort of nostalgia. So it can be anything that you want to talk about your business, about a project that you're doing. You could be a performer who wants to be the play out guest, because one thing that I haven't got around to sorting out is my musical play out. And also I do try and daily blog. So if you want to see what I'm kind of up to right now, what's going on in my head, that's the place to see that. So before I end the stream, we've kind of got 3 minutes. Any final words from you, Graham?
Well, I just maybe summarize what I said before, which is that there is a right to be funded to develop your skills in the arts and to carry you over when you haven't actually got work which is paid, because every artist will continue anyway, unpaid.
Yeah. Fran?
Yes. And I'll just say for the 93rd time, that needs to be temporary, because we need to look at the future of a properly structured, funded arts industry, creative arts industry, which means that the notion of working is much more commonplace than it is now. And so the idea of the living wage, what the daily living wage, or whatever it's called, is useful, but not central at all. And that's in the future. And I think that what Graham is saying is how we move in that direction, because there's no doubt things that we have to do now, which will lead on to other things. We can't just do the whole lot in a single grab.
Yes, it should come through all the various funding bodies, including the government, but also all of the other ones, including the Arts Council and local councils, etc.
Yeah.
Well, can I just add one more thing?
One more thing, Fran.
We are proposing in this document to get rid of the Arts Council and to stop it, to not have it, and so that the regional structure will be regional with something in the centre. It's in there, but we do not want the Arts Council. The notion, the politics behind it, and all of those things we say in that document are not what's needed for the arts here, which needs to be focused on receivers of the arts, on creators of the arts, and a structure to distribute and pay.
The structure of, and I think that is definitely a discussion and a show that needs to be had, because although there is the institution that is the Arts Council, there are some phenomenally talented workers that work for the Arts Council, and as a result of being able to work for them, they do champion the arts locally and regionally and in nations. And what if there's a restructuring, what happens to the employees or people who work for the Art Council? Does it merge and morph into something else, or is it a close down and open a new thing? Conversation that we don't have time for in this show. So thank you, Fran, and thank you, Graham, for joining me on this. I have no idea what the next week's show is going to be like or what the topic is. I think I've decided, but I will have a think about it in the week. It's the great thing about doing live streams, that there is no opportunity to edit. We go live, we talk for 45 minutes, and then it is there on demand for you to take a look at. So again, please do get in touch if you have anything that you would like to say to me, if you would like to be on the show. And thank you very much, Fran and Graham, for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Karen.